All right, everyone. Thank you for joining another Nerding Out Cardio Nerd session. This is an extremely exciting evening for us all. Um, we have Dr. Swapnil Hiremath today with us. We are so excited to have you. All of us know a lot about you and are excited to learn a lot about the way that you run Journal Club for nephrology. Um, Dr. Hiremath is a staff nephrologist at the Ottawa Hospital. He's an associate professor and a faculty of medicine at the University of Ottawa, and also an associate scientist in the clinical epidemiology program at the Ottawa Hospital Research Institute. His medical education has been in the University of Mumbai and the University of Ottawa. He also has a master's in public health from Harvard School of Public Health and certification from the American Society of Hypertension as a specialist in hypertension. He is also the co-founder of the very popular open online Twitter-based journal club, Fgc, and arguably, maybe not even arguably, but the most popular Twitter-based journal club. He is also faculty on Nephrology Social Media Collective Internship, or NSMC. Dr. Hiremath, we are so excited to have you here in our nerding out session with the Cardio Nerds.
Excited to be here. Let's chat.
Awesome. Let's do it. So we're gonna open up with some questions that we've all been interested in asking you. Kind of starting off with knowing that traditionally Journal Club has been kind of run in libraries or conference rooms, and slowly we've also heard about or have participated in them transitioning to restaurants or homes where they are discussed over food and drinks, for example. However, now we are seeing more and more journal clubs happening on Twitter and social media. What was the genesis of the idea for you as far as transitioning to a medium of social media, and what do you feel were the barriers and challenges for you?
Yeah, this is a great question, and we can chat about this for the next hour. So I'll try to be brief. The most of these ideas have come about on Twitter. So in early 2014, and I'm dating myself a little bit, so that was just over 8.5 years ago. I think 2012, 2013 is when nephrology Twitter took off. Previously it was blogs and, whatever else was there before. And 2013 is when I got really actively involved with mostly conference tweeting. And that's how most of the Twitter activity was around our big conferences. But then, when some papers would come out and there were enough of us, like Joel, of course, Kidney Boy, and I and Matt Sparks were around, and there were a few others. Some of them have gone away now. But we were chatting about articles, right? When some article comes out, hey, this is a paper, and I like this paper, and typically I would go in and say, I don't like this paper. I played that part. And there was one conversation in particular. It was in February or March of 2014 when we were arguing. There were 4 or 5 of us, and we were arguing about back and forth about the strengths and weaknesses. And one of us said, hey, this is like a journal club. And that it was like that. It was like someone said, this is like a journal club. And we said, why don't we run a journal club on Twitter? And Joel and I kept, and the others went away. People laugh, and there are all these ideas that are thrown about, but nothing happens. But I kept pestering Joel, and Joel is like the godfather of Kidney Boy, is the godfather of most of the things we have done on in nephrology social media sphere. So I kept pestering him, saying, Joel, we should do this. We should do this. And Joel was like, okay, why don't you write up a blog about how we should do this? And I think he meant for me to go away, right? He was giving me a task, and he thought I would not do it, and that would be the end of it. But then I did some reading. There was an allergy journal club, which was again faded away. There was a urology journal club, which was actually very well run and organized out of Australia, but that also has gone away since. So I looked at all that. I made up a 2-pager. If that blog is still on Medium, at that time we didn't have nepjc.com. We experimented with some name, JC Nef, Kidney JC, Nef JC, and Nef JC sounded nice, so we said Nef JC. And Joel realized I wasn't going away, right? So he said, okay, let's do this. And this is something, right? If you have a new project, you need more than one person. You need to keep egos aside as if, this is my thing. It is not my thing. So this was Joel and I initially. So April 2014, we chose an article, and we have experimented with many different things over the years, some of which have worked out, some of which have not. But that was the genesis. And we actually did not mean, I was happy that the first chat had 14 people. And we were worried that, it would be just me and Joel chatting with each other. So the fact that 14 people showed up was like a tremendous success. Right? In academic round, sometimes that's all you have. So 14 was a success. And we have gone on to, like, for example, Credence, we had about 600 people. And I hosted that chat, and it was crazy. It was super crazy. But typically, nowadays we have anywhere from roughly 75 to 150 people for that 1 hour who are actively tweeting, right? And many other people are passively following, as I'm sure you've experienced. But we have that much actively tweeting. So that's sort of briefly how NevJC began, and it grew. But I'm sure you have more questions, and we can come back to this topic later.
No, absolutely. I mean that's an amazing overview of how the idea was generated. I love how I feel like a lot of persistence ended up paying off. How would you compare like the first FJC you've had to the one you most recently had? What do you feel like is the biggest change? Because I have maybe some experience with Devesh talking to you about the first one we've had and the most recent one that we've done.
Yeah, so we made a lot of mistakes, and we have learned from them. But the key thing is that you should keep experimenting.
Mhm.
You need not do A/B testing, but something like that, right? You keep testing and seeing what works and what doesn't work. And if something works, you keep on doing it. If something doesn't work, you could either modify or change it, or drop it off completely. So the first FGC, we wrote a small blog summary. We had decided early on we need a blog summary for people to go to. And then we did the chat. And then when we went back and we took all the tweets from Simpler and we posted that PDF as a transcript. But we also did something called, at that time, it was called Storyfy. So it was a third party app which would allow you to pick certain tweets and make a story. And you could put in a link, you could put in an image and some tweets, and it would be like a slideshow that people could view. It was very nice. But when Twitter, Adobe bought Storyfy, and then they killed it because it wasn't profitable. So all the Storyfies that we had made were lost in the neither. It was gone in the crowd. And sometimes that happens with Twitter. Twitter had these they had Twitter moments. Now they call it Twitter news or whatever it is. Twitter events, I think they call it now. And they keep changing the options, and if they change the API, these things break. I mean, anyway, so we did that, and then we quickly realized that people were hungry for more. So our blog posts became longer and longer, and now they are. If you put them into pages, we have gone from just 3 paragraphs to like almost a complete manuscript itself is our latest blog post. So that is one. We were very early adopters of the visual abstract concept. So that was Andrew Ibrahim from University of Michigan, a surgeon who came up with that idea. And when I saw it, I went to Joel and said, "This is really cool. We should do this." And again, I'm terrible at making. I'm not a visual person. I don't make visual abstracts or infographics. But I saw that idea and I said, "This is fabulous." And we took it on. So we started creating visual abstracts for each of our journal clubs. And the last few things we have done more recently is the curation. So for curation, the question that came up earlier before we started this is, how do you make this information available for people who missed the journal club? And I think this is something we still struggle with, because if you are on Twitter and you are on the live conversation, then you join the conversation and you see the flow, right? And there are often not just one thread. We have a moderator, but often the moderator is saying something and there are these, 10 different people talking about 10 different things at the same time. So that's very common. And someone who comes after the fact and tries to read those tweets and tries to make sense, it does not make any sense at all. So to make some kind of a sense, the Storyfy concept was useful. The Twitter events are still useful. I've done them a few times and I can put in links if you want to look at them. They are a little bit more work. You have to go through all the tweets and manually add each tweet, and to try to make a narrative structure for that. But we have quit that and we just do tutorials now. which is like a 10 tweets only, right? So the 10 tweets is kind of an upper limit. I don't know if you have had Tony Brew, but Tony thinks, anywhere from 10 to 20, maybe 20 is the upper limit. But we have chosen 10 as, that's the most attention span people have. In terms of how we do the tweet chat itself, the moderator has a script, and we try to kind of start with, background, methods, results, and what happens next. Roughly 10, 15 minutes for each. And some people like to have these kind of, big question, but we have found that people don't really stick to the question. Especially if there is a nice crowd of people, there is a critical mass of people, conversations happen. You just have to provide the medium, and you don't have to drive the conversation. In case sometimes when, there are only 30, 40 people, then you really need those questions to drive the conversations. The other stuff we have used, of course, is Twitter polls, which are very useful to drive conversation. And many people may not actively tweet, but they often vote in the polls. So you will find that the number of people who vote in the poll is, a few hundred, maybe a few thousand, but the active participants are only, 50 or 60. So these are some of the things we have done. And I think the visual abstract has really taken off. People love the visual abstracts. I have mixed feelings about that because, just like people who read the abstract and don't read the paper miss a lot of details. That is a problem with vision. That is actually magnified by visual abstracts. And I've tried to push in, you add some limitations. Now, again, it's hard to add limitations. So for a large trial from NEJM, this usually does not matter, right? Because those are really good trials. They don't have big problems in it. So who cares? But sometimes we are talking about some, small observational study or some, even if it's a large observational study, it's got propensity score matching, maybe they've got collider bias, selection bias, something. And the way the visual abstract creators do it, they work on the author's conclusions and discussions. So they often, don't discuss the limitations as much. So that's my bug, my problem with visual abstracts, and I'm in a minority with that, but and that's something we'll never solve, right? Every medium has its pros and cons.
No, absolutely. And there's so many key points in what you were mentioning. I mean, especially as far as the summary after the cards JC, but also I think there's so much beauty in, trial and error with these NEF JCs or Twitter journal clubs. Is you try something, you see what worked, you continue that, you see what didn't work, you kind of make adjustments, and you keep going, and you start noticing that maybe between one and the next journal club to the public, there was not too much difference. But once you've seen over the course of time how you've improved journal club, I think it's beautiful. And I feel like every time you put out a journal club, in your mind, you think, this still isn't perfect and we can still work to improve it. So I think not only is it fun to be presenting trials, but it's also like, all right, how am I going to make this more unique than what we just presented? So really, it is an art, and there's a lot of beauty to it. But now kind of transitioning to the selection of trials. So suppose, you were planning your next NEFJC and you wake up and you're like, all right, what is your first step as far as your trial selection, and how do you bring that into NEFJC?
Yeah. So any activity that you're doing, you need to have when you're doing a CME event, for example, you need to have a planning committee. And we can talk about the topic of CME as well. We explored that. It was just too painful, so we didn't bother. I know there are some journal clubs. I don't know if Cards JC does it, but JHM Chat, which is Journal of Hospital Medicine, and a few others, they actually give you CME credits. But anyway, that's sort of, think about it as that. Even whether you do it or not, think about it as a formal educational event you're doing. So you need to have a planning committee. So our planning committee is a large DM group. It started off with me and Joel selecting the articles, and then it slowly expanded, Matt and others. And now it's roughly at 60 people who are there in the Twitter DM group. And people suggest articles all the time, right? Like right now, we have like 5 or 6 suggested for October. And we said, no, we can't do all of this. These are the ones which are high impact and which we can study. Now, anything that's published in New England or Lancet or JAMA, which is like for nephrology, like you guys publish in NEJM all the time, but for nephrology, it's less common. So any nephrology trial that is published in these big journals, we try to include. It's like a slam dunk, right? We this is going to be practice changing, we should include it. Um, and sometimes we steal, right? We discuss sodium HF, which is more of a heart failure trial. We did classic, which was like an intensive care trial, but we argue electrolytes belongs to us and IV fluids belong to us. So we sometimes, do that, especially when the pickings for our thing is less. But in particular, we also try to explore other areas. So, if we just do trials, that's not the end. That's not everything that we should be doing, right? So we do try to include anyway, large observational studies we do include, of course, but we have particularly tried to do a few more things. So something that is popular, but which is not traditionally thought of as journal club are guidelines. And you can argue about whether guidelines are a good place, are a good topic for journal club at all, right? Like traditional journal clubs, you will never have guidelines. But we have done guidelines, and guidelines are some of the most popular chats we have had. And I think they have been useful because we have not taken the guidelines as this is what the guideline says, we should all be doing it. We have applied the same critical appraisal lens to guidelines, and we have kind of said, hey, these guys are wrong. This is like a 1A guideline, but the evidence doesn't hold up. And we have been very bold in criticizing some of these guidelines, which makes for a way more fun discussion, right? Whether we are right or wrong. But that putting that, that antagonistic frame of mind is very useful. So guideline discussions have been extremely popular. And when we did the first one, it was like, hey, we are, going into uncharted territory, but they have worked out very well. So we have done that. We have done a few physiology papers. They were very challenging to do, but Joel was very keen. So we have done a couple of them. But the other style of papers we have done are basic science research papers. Now, I find them extremely difficult. I'm an epidemiologist. I'm not a basic scientist. But in October, we are doing one on polycystic kidney disease and, some genetic stuff. And what we really try to do, those are slightly different in flavor. They are more explanatory rather than, hey, let's, are the statistics right or not? And we try to get someone who knows the methodology and to explain that methodology. For example, there was a paper on single cell RNA, and we got Jenny Lin from Northwestern who, made a cool video. This is how it works and what. And so on, we learned the methodology. We learned a little bit more. Obviously we can't critique the mouse studies too much, but at least we can understand the broad method and how it applies. So those they are really hard to pull off. The conversation is, the attendance is a little bit lower, but there are many more people who are passively following along. But they are still, I think they are important, right? Because many of these papers are really key. They move the field forwards, and these are things that in the clinical sphere may appear a few years from now. But those are some that we have deliberately tried to do. So guidelines, occasional review paper, the basic science paper, those are the sort of different papers that we have dealt with, which I think are again, challenging new stuff to try out.
That's so wonderful. And I'm excited to also share a little bit about our process. But before I do that, do you also try to think about maybe different subtopics in nephrology as you discuss them moving forward? Because maybe there's different physicians with different areas of expertise. Do you try to kind of alternate topics, or is that not necessarily something that we need to consider?
Yeah, we do need to consider that. For example, in our area, it's hemodialysis, peritoneal dialysis, hypertension, glomerulonephritis transplant, and so on and so forth.
Right.
So we do try to spread, a little bit. At the same time, if there is no exciting paper in hemodialysis, we are not going to talk just for the sake of doing it. But we have, we discussed a lot of fluosin papers. They are not SGLT2 inhibitors, right? They're fluosins. But we didn't discuss Emperor preserved or Emperor reduced. We haven't discussed any of the Deliver papers. We discussed Declare, we discussed Empareg and Canvas, but we didn't discuss Declare, and so on and so forth, right? Because it becomes too much. Otherwise, we could just be talking of fluosins in every journal club, the amount of papers that are coming out. So we kind of consciously step back saying, okay, we know this already. We are not going to do it. At the same time, I know EMPA kidney is going to come out in a month, and we have to discuss that because, in nephrology, that's a big one. So we did discuss some of them, but we kind of dial back and ignore a few. These were all published in NEJM or Lancet, right? we still did not discuss them because we thought it was too much. So we do try to do that, but our pickings are somewhat limited sometimes in certain areas. So we are not very fixed in trying to make sure, every other, one transplant, then one dialysis, one hypertension. We can't do that. It's more, uh, it's more organic, keeping the overall, spread a little bit in mind. I don't even count. This year we did so many GN, so many transplant. We don't. It's just kind of by a gestalt about how things are going.
Yeah, no, I mean that's very helpful because I think maybe starting off we kind of were just picking trials, maybe a little bit at random, but as we moved forward, we always said, it would be nice to at least consider doing a little bit of alternating from, heart failure to EP to interventional, just not only so that you get as much participation as possible from so many different groups, but we also thought that maybe this would allow certain groups to rest from journal club because, there are a lot of experts that participate a lot. So you don't want to tell them, here's a journal club, and then here's one more in 3 or 4 weeks. We want to give them some time to kind of unwind and get prepped for the next one. We don't have it formalized, but I think it's something we're trying our best to do. But like you said, if there are, good trials in certain topics, sometimes we'll go 2 in a row in the same subfield and it'll be more organic that way. So
Yeah,
like you mentioned that.
The point you made about bringing in people from other areas is really important. That's how the community actually grows, right? If you're talking about, coronary artery disease all the time, the other guys are getting bored, the heart failure guys walk away, and so on, right? They are like, oh, this is like a, just a stenting journal club or whatever, So that's absolutely true. You should do it. You should proactively, deliberately do it to make sure, everyone has something. And sometimes we have chosen, a paper which was published in a lesser journal of possibly of less importance just because we haven't done a PD topic for a while. This is sort of, big in PD, though it's not big in nephrology per se. Let's discuss that. So we have done that occasionally, not something that's absolutely, trash, but something that may not have, reached the same level just because we do need to do that, as a community, we need to do a little bit of that.
No, I love it. I mean, things that are of peak interest and doing a little bit of consideration for the alternate. I love that balance. No, that's very useful information. But so now that we've kind of picked your brain about your thought process about how you pick an article and how you lead the charge as far as it moving forward. What advice would you give someone who is starting off? Like maybe what advice would you have given yourself in 2014 if you were trying to start journal club, or what advice would you give us who've been doing it or are still trying to make sure we do the best at it we can? We'd love to hear kind of that part of the advice from you.
Yeah, it's really the one of the key things we didn't realize when we started off is how much work this was going to be. This was completely a 5 to 9 kind of project from Joel and I. And it has become a beast, right? And we have tried we do them twice a month, which is too much. Yeah, but we explored doing it. The original idea was to do it every week. So twice a month was a compromise, and we feel we should stick to it. So we have stuck to it for 8.5 years now, which is a lot of work. So if you're doing a lot of work, it cannot be done by one person or two people, right? You need a village, you need a community. And it grew very slowly. So it was the two of us. And then, Matt would do the basic science papers, for example. And then we started getting our own local fellows to help, oh, are you interested? Why don't you do this? And then you discuss it in our academic journal club as well. We would kind of volunteer them into doing this. But then the social media internship was started, right? And that was the next year in 2015. And that was a lifesaver. So to be very, very honest, because of that, and we started with 5 interns in 2015. And I know you guys, just like you guys, we have, roughly 40 now. We had even more than that in one class, which is unmanageable. So we have kind of dialed it down to roughly 40. And they really do all the work, right? So the way that is the key thing, is to have a lot of people involved. Now, that is easy to say, but hard to do. Many people say they will work, but they don't. And this takes a certain kind of person to work on this. But the internship has been very useful for us because throughout the internship, I work with all 40 of them as they go through their, we call them rotations, is your blocks. And whoever is good at it, we kind of say, hey, why don't you come after you're done your internship and work with us? And most people are happy to do that. And again, some things happen in life, right? People move, they get a new job, they get kids, whatever, stuff is happening in their life, and that's fine. But it's really good to have a large group of people. And that is something we learned as we were doing it, but that has been the only way we have been able to function. What else would I say? It takes money to run this. Right now, our pledge drive is going for the first 4 5 years. Joel and I were using our credit cards to pay for the bills. And then we realized it was, my wife wasn't looking at the statement, so it was okay. But then we realized it was getting to be too much. So we are, trying to work through donations and not drug company support. But a nice, support for that would also be useful. We did realize how much money this thing the cost. But the key is to have like-minded people and get them. And sometimes, if you build a product that is good, people will gravitate towards you. And that's what has happened to us, is that people have come to us. The other thing is that this is not so much about credit. It's not that this is my or yours. It belongs to all of us. I think I've been doing it for too long. I'm going to think about, succession planning soon. But it's really the people who come in should feel that it is their, it belongs to them also, right? Otherwise, if it is, if it is Swap's and Joel's thing, they are not going to feel as much a sense of ownership to that. So creating that sense of ownership in the people. So, like for example, the visual abstracts, I don't do them, but we have a bunch of awesome creators and they own it, right? And they have been taking it on their own and doing it, and it's their thing. Similarly, the tutorial which Jamie Winnows designed, the design of the 10 tweets, he's from UK, one of our really good interns from last year. So he owns it, he does it, he experiments with it, and we completely let him do it based on what he wants. So nurturing talent and making sure you recognize talent and give them the freedom to do what they want. These are some useful tips.
So much of what you just said resonates with us. I know a lot of us were kind of like nodding, and a lot of interest kind of translates to a lot of things we've seen as we've progressed, as far as, things that key phrases you've mentioned. It takes a village. I've been doing where we've been doing Cards JC for a little over a year, and I started off as a fellow, and I remember needing so much help when I started off, and even now kind of in a more supervising role, I realize how much how nice it is to see the teamwork and how you create product. And like you said, people will gravitate towards it as they see it kind of becoming a more well-oiled machine. But I think the teamwork in it is the most rewarding part. And like you said, this is not my product, this is our product. And we just came off of the Cards JC rotation, and Bree had created stunning visual abstracts and incredible article summaries. And she will tell you that she worked so well amongst her teammates in order to create it. I don't think any one of us alone, even if we had 1 month, would be able to do a NEF JC or Cards JC on their own. So I like that you mentioned it takes a village, and I think that village will continue to grow, and that would help the JCs become more refined as they move along. So just kind of a sub question that Devesh was also asking, as far as when you allocate, I think you mentioned something about allocating, whether it's fellows, interns, or residents. How do you go about with allocation? You mentioned if you feel someone is good at something, are there rotations? How do you go about with allocation of different tasks in promoting an FJC?
Yeah, so the moving parts in the FGC are the blog summary, then the visual abstract, then hosting the chat, and we have 2 chats right now. So you need 2 people for that, and making a summary at the end. So there are all these different tasks. If no one does it, Joel and I do it, and that happens sometimes. But what we do is, in the rotation, right at the beginning of our block or rotation, I explain it to our interns, saying this is how FGC works. We just have a sign up sheet on Twitter. on Google Sheets, and people sign up for all these slots. And sometimes, in the beginning, people are very enthusiastic, and they're almost fighting, because there are, you know, 10 people, and there are only so many blanks available. But as time goes on, which I mean, I'm sure you see even in your regular fellowship, right? You become jaded and you're like, I just want to get this over with. I want to give my exams, get a real job. So the blanks become more, and we have to kind of cajole people saying, hey, why don't you do this? This is something that's of interest to you. But what I've seen is there is usually not a lack. Um, some people sign up, initially, of course, there is this rush. But now I found that in roughly 6 month mark and later, some people have, become a little bit disconnected. But many others are still very passionate and they sign up to do more than one thing. And, be my guest. If somebody has time in their life and they want to do more stuff, we let them do it. We try to encourage, others to do it as well. So it's not allocated, once we had the internship, it's kind of very much volunteer, though sometimes it requires a little bit of nudging. Each of our rotations, just like there is a leader, there's a pod leader, one of the faculty members and a few others, and they kind of work with the team throughout the year. So, the leader is there through their blog rotation, their podcast rotation, their FGC rotation, their tutorial rotation, their infographic rotations. So they know them, they come to know the interns very well. So they are able to, help us saying, hey, this is this person's strength and whatever, and they can work a little bit more. And they know more about what is going on in the person's life to help them. Having said that, there is the occasional time that I have had to step in and do some hosting or whatever, and that's totally okay. The thing that takes a lot of work is the summary. We try to put a lot of effort in trying to make the summary as polished as possible, and often interns, just like you read a paper and you take everything the authors write for granted. And then I have to go and destroy everything they've written sometimes, like a reviewer do, and say, no, this is wrong. The authors got this wrong and they got that wrong. And I think that process, apart from learning how to write a blog, a lot of interns tell me that going through an FJC makes them better at critically appraising literature, because they understand how it's not just me. Jamie is very much like me. Joel also has a slightly different critical angle viewpoint. So, and Jade, there are a bunch of us who are reading this now. So we all put in our thoughts into it's a Google Doc that we work through. So we need, it's all Google Docs or whatever. It's all in the cloud, right? That makes the process a little bit more helpful. So we do a lot of revising and commenting and re-revising. So I think that process of writing the blog is very helpful for them to understand critical appraisal. So that's again, it's all voluntary for our interns, but it's a learning process.
No, definitely as someone who's still, training and part of the learning process, it's nice to hear you as a mentor say that, if a certain task or a part of an FJC wasn't completed, that you would step in to complete it. I think that really speaks volumes about your leadership, in the sense that no task, maybe for lack of a better word, no task in FJC is too little for you. You're willing to step into everything. And I think when people see this, they be even more willing to do that, just seeing that everyone in the team would be willing to participate. And now as you see NFJC continue to boom, continue to grow, it's reached, this is far beyond America, far beyond Canada, USA. Like the whole world is reading about NFJC. How have you found that? How have you been able to recruit people maybe to participate, like trainees, for example, if possible, to participate in FJC? Has there been kind of a strategy as far as recruiting people who are not necessarily, who don't directly work with you? Has there been some sort of strategy or recruitment process in trainees like that?
Yeah. So I've done this. Joel and I and others have had this talk about, how to use social media. And I've gone to many places, many conferences and talked about, hey, this is how you should tweet. This is how you can use Twitter. And I found the uptake to be terrible. People who get it, they get it. They don't need to go to a conference to understand how to tweet. I mean, there are some people, you get a few people who are like, I've always wondered how to use it, and they are kind of keen from the beginning, and that's all they need, that spark. And maybe at the conference they get that spark. So we have tried it, and I still keep trying. I still get invites, and I still go and talk. But if I go back and look, most of the people at the talk, they are kind of okay. This is interesting, but they don't actually dive in. A few people do, but my conversion rate is probably 1 or 2%, maybe even lower. Um, so the people who have jumped in have done it on their own. And you think about Joel and I at the same place, right? I'm from Ottawa. It's a small city in Canada. It's not like Harvard. Same thing for Joel. Joel is a clinical nephrologist. He's not even, he's a private practice guy in Detroit. We are not at Duke or Stanford or UCLA or, any huge university in North America or UK or the world, right? And that's perhaps that was important because we were seeking knowledge, we were seeking the community, and that's how we have often found. So again, trying to go back to your question and answer it. Um, it's been mostly people who have found us organically through word of mouth and stuff like that. To be very, very honest, it's not been that we have gone to conferences. I mean, to some extent, it is conferences and all that, but it's not the major source of people who have come. Um, the other aspect is, very funnily enough, on FJC we thought we would have a lot of trainees and students, but what happens is we often have more attendings who are there, and the group of attendings who have been a major part has been those outside academia, and that is partly because, again, this was not how we thought things would play out. When you're in academia, you get a lot of rich education. There are rounds, there are journal clubs, there are this and that and whatever. But and you have a lot of smart colleagues around you to discuss your cases, right? Once you are in private practice, you have nothing. I mean, you have something, but you don't have the same level of rich discussion available. So these guys, they just gravitate to this social media stuff. I have had a lot of comments from these people. They love what we are doing and they join this. And many of them, it's not that people in academia are smart and private practice are not. They are very smart guys, maybe smarter than us. They know what is good. And but they really have joined these discussions. But what we have done, and I'm sure you guys do too, to try to encourage new people to remain active is, we devote the first 5 minutes of the chat just to say hello. So what happens is a result of that. In the first, if you look at our transcript, it's mostly, hi, I'm good. How are you? Whatever, it's, hey, how are things in Ottawa? Or welcome to FJC. Great to see you again. Great to see you after a long time. And people who are not part of the community are like, this is a waste of time. But I think it is very useful because, I've taken part in some tweet chats and I kind of say, hey, I'm Swapnil. I'm from Ottawa and ID J Club. And people, nobody says anything to me. And I'm like, is anyone know I'm here? And you kind of feel, you don't know anyone. But that simple welcome, hey, welcome, hey, Patrick, welcome to FJC. That makes you feel, okay, somebody has seen me and some validation of the fact that you're there. And even if you don't see anything, a lot of these people then keep coming back. And even if they're a medical student or whatever, right? We are trying to say that, even if you're a medical student, it doesn't matter. Your opinion counts. If you have a question, please go ahead and ask that. And I think we do a reasonable job, but we should do a better job of that. Some of us, I'm one of them who is so opinionated that sometimes, trainees especially are scared to say something because, oh, Swap is going to, come and jump on me and criticize me. So that's something that we have to be careful a little bit on social media. I don't think I get the balance right. But we have to nurture, young ones and in whatever way we can and encourage them to participate. So that first 5 to 10 minutes, and even if someone comes later on and says hello, we try to encourage that. So often, I'm not hosting the FJC, it's someone else. But even if it's a topic that I'm not hosting, that's one of my jobs. I'm kind of monitoring the hashtag and seeing, hey, this is a new face. Let's say hello to them. Let's make them feel welcome and be part of the community, because that's how you attract people, right? You talked about global. I know I'm giving a very long-winded answer, but the global aspect of it, it began with, we were doing these chats at 9 p.m. and we began to notice that there were people from India where it was morning who were joining in on their own, right? I wasn't doing anything. And they actually came and demanded, saying, hey, we want our own chat. That's how our last Asian chat happened. The European chat was different because we had a lot of, friends from UK. And they said we would like to do the chat, Tom Oates in particular. So that's how the UK chat started. But that is something that fell apart. After the Asian chat started, then the UK chat became less, interesting. I guess the numbers went down. I think COVID was really hard. Remember in UK in late 2020, early 2021, things were really, really bad. So a lot of those guys were really burnt out, and our attendance shrunk. And we said, hey, it's not worth it. There were only 5 or 10 people. So we actually shut down that. I mean, they're free to do it now. And I think the momentum is now coming back. I'm getting messages from some of them saying, hey, I missed this. I'm like, it's up to you. You can decide whether you want to do it or not. It shouldn't be forcible, right? We are not forcing you to do the chat. If there is a crowd, you want to have a fun discussion, go ahead. If not, then forget it.
No, I mean, again, that's a wonderful way to kind of continue to attract more trainees, and you mentioned something that transitions well to our next question. You mentioned the sense of feeling validated, which we have we kind of tried to parallel or mimic that as far as logging into our main Cardio Nerds account. And anytime, like you said, anytime we see a new face, we welcome them through that main account. I think that sense of acknowledgement is really important. But speaking of acknowledgement, maybe to an even higher level, you might know that I'm transitioning to the awards and how you came up with the awards and the process to select who's getting what award. So can you talk to us a little bit more about that?
Yeah, again, this is evolved over time. The first year we did that was 2014. And it was like, hey, we should do something. There are all these people who are there. And all of us, like most of us, are doing it on our free time, right? This is truly FOMED, right? Free open access medical education. We are not doing it and getting paid for it. We are not doing it and getting any credit for it. So why don't, Joel and I were chatting about it, and we said, why don't we give out some kind of awards for, hey, this guy is really smart, and, this guy is doing a lot of work. Let's do that. So we didn't have a name for it. In 2014, we made up this, plasticky kind of 3D printed awards. And it was like best tweeter and best blogger. That's it, right? We had 2 awards. I think Tom Oates and who was David Goldfarb got those awards for best tweeter at the conference. So this was different. And then we said, okay, in 2015, it was like, okay, we have now got our internship and we are getting, more structured. We need to have a trophy. And luckily for the first couple of years, there's a not-for-profit dialysis chain called Satellite Healthcare in California. They in the Bay Area, actually, they stepped up and they said, we'll fund, those awards. And we had a cool design and we made up the awards, right? Like it was like sort of like the Oscars, best film, best actor, so the best scientist, the best research paper, MVP was like somebody who's the most valuable player. Again, baseball, and the Nathan Hellman Social Media Award. So that's so Nate Hellman, and I don't know if Matt has been here, but Nate Hellman was sort of the originator of the Renal Fellow Network. The Renal Fellow Network is the oldest nephrology blog. It's been around since early 2000s. Nate Hellman was a nephrology fellow at Brigham when he started it. And it was kind of he used to write 2 or 3 blogs every day. And it was like, and again, there'd be one paragraph and it was, hey, this is what I learned today and I'm sharing with the world, which is the purest form of blogging and tweeting I think I know. He passed away, as a young attending, he passed away too early. But then Matt Sparks and a few others took up the Renal Fellow Network and kept it alive. But to remember him, we created this Nathan Hellman Social Media Project of the Year. And I think that's been really useful because there are other people have new projects, right? It's not just us. So we have been able to give this award to other projects. Like there was one called Everyday Cases in Nephrology from India. Another one was for GlomCon, which is a glomerular, conference kind of a cloud-based fellowship run out of now Ali, who's in Kaiser Permanente, and others run that. So there are other projects in nephrology being done by other people, and we are kind of promoting them, saying, "Hey, congratulations, you created a great product." And then we have a few new awards. The one that came up last year was the Social Justice Award because of everything that's been going on around the world. So we have started that as well, which women in nephrology got. So there's always something new, and we are trying to, again, it's sort of very much like the Oscars, right? But it's kind of a event, right? Let's celebrate what has been done, and let's recognize new talent. It's a little bit contentious because if someone gets an award, there are so many other deserving people who do not get the award. We crowdsource the nominations, and we try to have categories where there are some categories where we allow public voting, and there are some categories where we just have our our group of 60 people. They select, because there is a lot of very interestingly, this award just gives you a trophy. There is no money attached to it, but some of these awards, people compete for them, and the competition is fierce. We have known about people, begging their friends and family members to vote. There is a certain block of vote. I won't say where it comes from. Certain geographical places and certain institutions. It's like you guys are canvassing for votes for this prize, which is amazing, right? Which is kind of tells us, oh, this is really valued. But so that's why we had to have some rules, and we try to have not more than one people. So only people who have signed up for a newsletter get to vote and so on. That's just because people have tried to game the system, which is a very interesting phenomena that we observe.
Yeah, no, that's so wonderful. I mean, healthy competition always kind of propels things forward, I guess. I love that. And I think
People are competitive.
right. And recognition, I think, is so important. I couldn't agree with you more. I feel like recognition keeps that drive going. It makes people feel appreciated, and that's certainly something that means a lot to us. We continuously try to recognize each other's work, and everyone's accomplishment is everyone's accomplishment. So resonates with us a lot. We want to be respectful of time, and we went through so many different questions, but also there was one, maybe we'll have some time for maybe one, at most two questions, but Tommy, who's our program director, and I know he was taking a lot of notes on your last on the last question that you just answered, as far as awards and creating awards. Tommy's very familiar with that. Was wondering, as far as I know, you're assessing people and performance and putting their appreciating their efforts and everything. What about the product that's put out? How do you evaluate when you look back and say, this is a cards JC or an FJC that we just did, excuse me. How do you look back and say, how do you assess it? Do you have kind of parameters? How do you look back and assess an FJC that you just put out?
Yeah, so we look, again, there are metrics, but like any metrics, they are imperfect. So we do track the number of active participants with Simpler. We track the number of tweets with Simpler. We track whether the author joined or not. Last year we published the data on the first 140 chats or so in seminars, and I can send you the link if you are interested. And we looked at, but these are the typical metrics, right? In academia, metrics are often you don't know how good they are, and it's about quantity. It's not about the quality necessarily. But that's all we have, to be very honest. It's hard to measure anything different apart from these kind of raw numbers that we have. But even looking at that, we looked at a few different things. Does it make a difference if the author is in the chat? And it makes a huge difference as far as participation is concerned. And I'm sure you've got authors sometimes, but during the chat, if you have an author, I think the discussion becomes much richer compared to when the author is not there. It becomes a little bit deeper. It's a bunch of yahoos talking about a paper versus somebody who did the study telling you, hey, this is why we did this, rather than you and me speculating about, why did they choose, 24-hour urine and not a 3-day dietary recall or whatever. So that is one thing. Basic science chats were still, again, the participation was slightly less than clinical, but it wasn't bad. Like I said, guidelines were, way up there. The number of people who join when we are discussing guidelines is very high. And so those things are what we noted, and that's all we are tracking. If you guys know of a better way of tracking metrics, let me know. But we just basically track these basic things. I'm a little bit concerned because simpler is not perfect. And we used to tag, like, impressions are useless. Impressions is a very imperfect number. We put it out when we tweet, but we don't track it actively. We track the active participants and the number of tweets. And again, the number of tweets, half of them are, hi, I'm here, I'm Swapnil from Ottawa. Is it really meaningful tweet? No, but there's no way to filter out the wheat from the chaff, the grain from the chaff. So we do have that.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's extremely helpful. I think we are also like actively trying to learn how to assess the performance of a journal club that we just put out, and understandably so, thinking about the impressions, and there's a lot of tweets that might have a lot of impressions, but really the quality of the tweet might not be there. And I wonder about, just again, we go back to creating the product or summary, wonder if that summary is kind of a good reflection of what came out of the tweet, but certainly a lot of different things to consider. But with that, this has been incredible. I think this is over and beyond what we could have imagined out of a nerding out session. If there was an award for nerding out session, which there was, I'd love to give you a nerding out session awards for the cardio on behalf of the cardio nerds. So, Dr. Hiremath, thank you so much for answering all these questions with really informative answers. And I think that even the JC that we do moving forward, a lot of it is inspired by what you've done and what you've taught us today. Like I said, this was recorded, so a lot more people are going to watch and learn from you and everything that you've mentioned to us. And again, an honor to have you here. And thank you so much for sharing all this insight with us. It's extremely educational, and it's going to have a far and wide impact. So thank you so much for joining us in our Cardio Nerds Nerding Out session.
My pleasure.
Absolutely.